Welcome back to the PFF NFL show. We're going to get into breaking down all the games for this weekend's action. I'm Mike Renner, joined by Steve Palazzolo and Sam Monson. Let's get right into the action. First game of the week, Falcons. Actually the favorites, 3-point favorites here, traveling to the Eagles. First time that's ever happened that a team going up against the number one seed in the playoffs is the favorites. But we all know why. Carson Wentz tore his ACL at the end of the season. Nick Foles, not quite the same quarterback. If you checked out the NFL QB annual that we put out today, you would have seen that pouring through the data. He has struggled in his limited time. So, do the Falcons deserve to be the favorites, Sam?
Yes. I don't know if they deserve to be 3-point favorites. I get why they're favorites, and I think it's probably the right call. They're very hot as a team right now. They've got a defense that's playing well. They've got an offense that's got talent and the ability to cause anybody problems. And the Nick Foles factor, obviously. But that Philadelphia defense still has the potential to be a really top unit. It has the potential to really mess up that Falcons offense in specific areas. They have Fletcher Cox, and the Falcons have two pretty bad guards. That right there is enough to potentially derail the Falcons' offense. So, yeah, I think they're good value for being favorites, but 3 points seems a little much.
Yeah, so the Foles thing's important, right? I mean, the first game that he played against the New York Giants, he played pretty well. He threw 4 touchdowns, and it looked like they could mitigate disaster with Wentz. And then Foles was terrible against the Raiders in Week 16, terrible in his limited time against the Cowboys in Week 17 before they took him out. So that is a major concern. I don't want to focus so much on him, though, that we do forget about the guys you're mentioning, on the Eagles and what they've done from a team standpoint, from a power rushing attack to, the tight ends and wide receivers that have contributed there. Nelson Aguilar's breakout season in the slot, the deep defensive line. And the big question mark for the Eagles coming into the year was the secondary, and they've played well for the most part this season. They showed some issues down the stretch, but overall, you got to remember that the Eagles, from a roster standpoint, were more than just Carson Wentz.
I'm going to say it. This line, 3 points, Falcons, is my favorite line of the weekend, arguably my favorite line of the entire year. I think the Falcons are incredibly underrated going into this game. One, the Nick Foles factor, he just has not even come close to replicating what Carson Wentz did in that offense. I get they did against the Giants, but a lot of quarterbacks did that against the Giants. In the game since, against the bad Raiders defense, he looked awful. And the thing is, this Falcons defense is terribly underrated at the moment. You look at their last 6 games, they're giving up 16.3 points per game against the Saints twice, the Bucks, the Panthers, the Rams, and the Vikings. Those are good offense that they're going up against. 16.3 points per game. They're coming into their own at the right time. I think they've gotten very underrated on that side of the ball because of their struggles on offense that everyone wants to talk about. This might be the third best defense left in the playoffs. In my opinion, I think it is.
I can see that. Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think this defense is definitely coming into its own, especially in coverage. Mm-hmm. Deion Jones is phenomenal in coverage.
There's no holes. There's nowhere to attack this defense.
I mean, he's been their best coverage player in all their biggest games, making ridiculous plays that's stopped anybody trying to make a comeback on them. I agree. I think this definitely has the potential to be a dominant shutdown defense.
Yeah, we've been talking about the Falcons all season. I mean, I feel like we've said it every single week, right? I've bet or picked the Falcons in our picks way more than I think most people have, because I've looked at all of our grades and said, hey, they're grading really well, but it's a play here, a play there, a Devontae Freeman fumble. It's just a handful of plays that's really screwed them over and why they ended up a 6 seed. But I think they're just as dangerous as they were last year. I'm looking at that defensive line. I think that's the thing I keep coming back to. We talked about Deion Jones flying around in the secondary, but 7 guys on that defensive line rotate in and out, and Vic Beasley, last year's sack leader, has the lowest grade out of the 7.
Yes,
and
it's wild.
So they've got Grady Jarrett, who's a top 20 interior defensive lineman per our PFF grades, Adrian Claiborne, a top 20 edge defender, and then a bunch of other guys who are just solid, grading at about 78, 80, 82, Tack McKinley. They're
Dontari
deep
Poe
on that defensive line. Dontari Poe as well.
Yeah, Poe's almost underrated in the fact that what he brings to the table this year, he hasn't been exceptional, but compared to what they had last year, Tyson Jackson, Jonathan Babineau, the who's who of just jag defensive tackles along that front, Dontari Poe is actually quality, and snap after snap, he's they don't have to have that silly rotation that they had a season ago and forcing grade Jarrett to play nose tackle. Now Jarrett plays a lot more 3 technique, and it's no coincidence that he's having a career year.
Tell you what's interesting. Last year, Vic Beasley was at this unsustainable, ludicrous sack conversion rate. You know, the average edge rusher converts pressure into a sack about 15% of the time. Vic Beasley, I think, was up at 28% a year ago, so it was always going to come back down to earth. But in terms of sack conversion rate this season, he's actually still up at 21%, which is still way above average. He just hasn't got any pressure. Like 28 total pressures over the entire year. It's not that the conversion rate has dropped, it's just that the pressure rate has dropped.
Still running into those cleanup sacks this year.
I was going to say, we talked about that last year. He's going to be a guy who's always high in the conversion rate because he's so exceptionally athletic that a quarterback breaks the pocket, he's tracking them down. I don't care if it's Russell Wilson. He has the speed and change of direction to do that. He just doesn't have the pass rushing moves to beat tackles on a regular basis. So anytime he's going to lead the league in cleanups almost every year because of the athleticism, but he's not necessarily going to be able to affect the quarterback play after play.
28 total pressures from 307 pass rushers in the regular season.
And the guy who's the opposite of that, of course, Brandon Graham, the guy that we always say gets a ton of pressure. And he gets that, like, a lot of those top-of-the-pocket pressures where maybe he'll get pushed a little bit past, but he's at least affecting the quarterback. But this year, converting them into sacks, 11 by our numbers. I don't know what the NFL has him at, but that's the first time he's been above 7 by our numbers. Brandon Graham's going to be a big factor as part of that deep defensive line for the Eagles. I use the same line for both of these teams. They're about 6 or 7 deep on the defensive line. I think that's beyond the Foles thing. That's potentially the story of the game, is that trench battle on both sides.
The one matchup I'm going to watch for, and because it happened earlier this year with the Falcons defense, how Big V, the Eagles left tackle, has been a nightmare for them. Basically, since he came in, that offense has just been different. He's allowed 9 sacks, 10 hits at the left tackle position in a little over half season worth of play, about 3/4 of the season worth of play. Adrian Claiborne has been known to eat up bad left tackles. You saw what he did against the Dallas Cowboys. That's just not a good matchup for them. Adrian Claiborne could seriously go off again in this one.
Eating up bad players opposite you. I mean, people ask us all the time, do you adjust for competition and all that stuff? Like, this is one of the reasons. It's so you can go back. Yeah, you could go back and point to Adrian Claiborne, destroyed Chaz Green in the Dallas Cowboys. And you don't downplay that. You say, that almost single-handedly won the game for Atlanta in that game against Dallas, right? Because he just dominated so badly. You have to win and dominate those matchups, and this is an opportunity for Claiborne to do that again.
And that's the other thing. It's like, you go to the Super Bowl, you're not guaranteed that you're going up against an all-pro left tackle. You might be going up against Big V. And then you might say, oh, wow, he's a guy that eats up on those type of players, so this is all of a sudden a good matchup for them.
Right.
So yeah,
you have to win that game, and there's value in that.
The Denver Super Bowl was entirely predicated on Von Miller destroying Mike Remmers. You put a better right tackle out there, maybe that game doesn't go the same way, but you don't downgrade Von Miller because he single-handedly destroyed a bad player. By the way, credit to you, because I think if you can't pronounce George's surname, definitely shouldn't give a shot to pronouncing the Big V's.
I'll give it a try. Halapolivati.
It's one of those you don't just jump into, though. You gotta look. You gotta try to say it in your head first.
Yeah.
I'm just giving some pronunciation advice.
You should definitely be coaching him up on pronunciation.
Oh, there's you want more segments, Mike. Steve coaches Mike up on pronunciation.
So, like, aren't you, for Pacific Islander names, supposed to pronounce every single vowel? It's like the key?
Sure.
I think it's like usually.
As your coach, I would say
I've heard that somewhere.
Let's pass.
All right, but yeah, I do think, though, it's just not a good matchup for the Eagles offense, what it comes down to. The only way I can see them is via the run game and just pounding it up front. That's the only way I really see it. I just don't see them having too much success.
I really think that Fletcher-Cox matchup, though, could be a big difference maker for them, because he has the ability to ragdoll high-quality, strong guards. He is going to destroy those two guys and bring a big amount of pressure on Matt Ryan right up the gut, which is always, I think, the worst place to get pressure.
Here's the thing, though. It's not going to be worse than what they saw last week.
I was going to say, they survived
it. They just did
it
it last week against Aaron Donald, and it's not going to be that bad because it's never been that bad. No one's ever, that's one of the highest graded games we've ever given out. So it's not going to be that bad. And Matt Ryan, of all quarterbacks this season, is one I would trust not to make that boneheaded mistake to give.
That is true, but while it may not be worse than Aaron Donald, there are going to be cleanup players here. Mm-hmm. There is no cleanup players with that Rams team. Now, if you manage to evade Fletcher Cox bull rushing your guard back into you, you're going to get Brandon Graham coming around the corner and snapping you up, getting the cleanup sack. So
you're saying you
This
like
does
the under.
This does feel like one of those games where
It does sound like it, doesn't it?
Sorry, this does feel like one of those games where the Eagles kind of have to play that underdog role of run the ball and control it. And look, we always talk about quarterbacks in this black and white. He's good, he's bad. But Foles or Bortles or whoever you're talking about, it's not like they're incapable of putting together a decent game. So Foles is capable of putting together a decent game, but I think it is one of those where you have to control the game. You got to control the clock and all that. All that cliche stuff about the running game and why did they trade for Jay Ajayi? It's got to be for games like this.
Yeah.
So let's get down right to it. Who you picking, Steve?
I'm taking the Falcons. I'm trusting what the PFF grades have said all season is the Falcons are underrated, and the Nick Foles factor is a huge one. But I just think the Falcons on both sides of the ball are as equipped as last year's team, and I think they're going to the NFC Championship.
Yeah, same. I think this team has always been set up to make a run into the playoffs and then deep into them. So I'm going to go with Vegas and say they win.
Yeah, I've already made my thoughts known. I think they're going to blow out the Eagles, actually. Lock of the week. And to go to one of Steve's favorite sayings, they can win in a number of different ways, the Falcons.
There you go.
That's what I like about this team. All right, on to that game. Later Saturday night, Titans traveling to New England to face the Patriots. Patriots, a 13-point favorite in this one. If the Titans were to win this, how do you see it happening, Steve?
There's two things that I think, on paper, we've talked about the Titans as not really one of those scary teams that get in the AFC, but there are a couple matchups that might favor them against New England if they're going to pull the upset. It's the run game with Derrick Henry against the New England run defense that's usually really stout and it's been shaky this year. And then it's the whole man coverage thing. I know you've got some numbers there as well, Mike, but if there's been a blueprint to slow down the New England offense this year, it's been good man coverage, not just like playing man coverage because Pittsburgh tried that. But there are ways to play that cover one, tight man coverage because they don't have that. They don't have a good man coverage beater at wide receiver this year. They have Edelman hurt out for the season. Brandon Cooks, it's not really his game. He'll get, he'll run deep every now and again, but that's a low percentage pass. And that takes Brady putting one or two perfect deep balls out there. And you can't rely on that every single week. Gronk is the X factor against man, but I could see them playing good tight man coverage, controlling the ball with Derrick Henry, and that would be that formula for Tennessee.
Also, Pittsburgh's kind of worked. They just didn't have anybody that could cover Gronk, which was a problem. But
nobody really has that.
That's your issue with playing man coverage against the Patriots.
But we see, like Eric Berry did a pretty good job, and here's the deal with Pittsburgh, right? And my boy Zach, who you kicked off the podcast, Mike, does a great job. So bitter, right? Zach's done a great job of saying the Steelers don't play man coverage by trade, so they're not good at necessarily formation adjustments and saying, oh no, Gronk's out wide, what do we do? Now he's in the slot, what do we do? Tennessee plays the third most man coverage of any team in the league. So if they want to double cover Gronk, they probably have it in their defensive packages to be able to do it, even though it's Dick LeBeau there and it's similar scheme in Pittsburgh, his old scheme. They could probably adjust to Gronk more and call out doubles better than Pittsburgh did. So it's man coverage, but it's also what do you do with your extra players when you play man coverage? And the good teams that play man can do that and take away one player better than teams like the Steelers who just looked like they installed a one-week game plan when they played a few weeks ago.
Yeah, Brady's man coverage stats this season, he had 252 dropbacks where the opposing defenses played man coverage. That was the most of any quarterback in the NFL. So there is, opposing defense corners have recognized that, hey, we need to play man against Brady. Completion percentage of 53.1 on those plays, 7.1 yards per attempt, passer rating of 84.3 on those throws. So it turns Brady into a fairly average quarterback. And you mentioned the no talent outside of Gronk. And one of the biggest things is Brandon Cooks, when he's going up against fast corners, has the biggest sort of production difference when he's going up against fast corners versus slow corners. Scott Barrett, one of our fantasy guys, did a study on it, and his points per target in terms of fantasy points was the single biggest difference in the NFL, and it wasn't even close. He was like by far and away, anytime he was guarded by a fast corner, he just did not produce whatsoever. I think Adoree Jackson qualifies as that, and I think they're going to have him shadow him in this one.
Yeah, so if you got Cooks is not that shifty receiver that's going to get open. So if you put Adoree Jackson on him, and then you find a way to use your extra players to slow down Gronk, and then for the Patriots, it becomes one of those running back games. Is it a James White game, or is it a slot receiver game? That's Danny Amendola. So, you can – and the Patriots are comfortable playing that type of game, but if you could take away Cooks and Gronk in those big plays, you're giving yourself a chance.
I really think we're just back to who covers Gronk. I mean, you look through that the back seven of that Tennessee defense, and they have nobody that can even give it a shot.
Two guys.
Two guys?
Yeah.
At the same time? Honestly, that's the way you have to do it. You have to work on the basis that if we're going to play man coverage against Brady, man coverage as a concept will work against every receiver they have except that one. The only way of dealing with that is to try and put two people on him.
Is he willing, though, to play after play after play? We saw it in the last drive in Pittsburgh, but the game leading up to that, he really wasn't just feeding Rob Gronkowski. Is he willing to just, if, hey, they're playing man coverage every snap, hey, I'm going to just throw it your way no matter what? Because that, like you said, yeah, Rob Gronkowski goes for 100, maybe 150 yards in the game, but what if they shut down everyone else, then all of a sudden you did a fairly good job.
Yeah. I mean, that is the one potential way of beating this entire defense is Rob Gronkowski cannot be covered with a guy. The interesting wrinkle that Tennessee can throw at this that ironically Pittsburgh don't anymore is their kind of zone blitzing stuff. Taking a guy that used to be Pittsburgh's defensive coordinator and run with all that stuff. They can put second guys near Gronkowski from strange places that other teams might not be able to. Certainly the Steelers wouldn't be able to this year. You might find outside linebackers or defensive ends or whatever popping up underneath Gronkowski and be able to try to bracket him that way despite playing man coverage.
The thing that other teams have had success with, and I thought Miami, when they did slow down New England in that Monday night game, it's pure man coverage and then man blitzes. So if you do mix it, and with that extra defender, you're either doubling somebody or you're sending him and you're putting a little bit of extra pressure on. That's the formula, but it's got to be well timed, and Brady can kill the blitz if he has that guy that can get open quickly, which again he doesn't really have. But that's where you have to just kind of sprinkle in and take your chances when you're going to send that fifth guy. But this is also one of those games where Tennessee's really good against the run, and when New England goes up against teams that are good at stopping the run, they are completely fine with saying, all right, we're not going to run it. We're going to spread it out and throw. So from a game plan standpoint, New England might go in and say, we're just going to be chucking the ball all over the field. They do that at times, and then this ends up becoming the key matchup in the game.
I also think, to go back to my original question of how, if Tennessee wins, how they do it, I do think Marcus Mariota needs to get involved in the run game as well. He did it a little last week, had 46 yards on 8 carries, did some scrambling.
Throw a touchdown pass to himself, maybe.
That could help too.
Yeah.
One or two.
Yeah, throw like 3 to yourself. Like,
if you guys are in
the more the better.
Take Mariota. He throws a lot of passes to himself for touchdowns.
I do think getting him involved in the run game, they did it last week. I think you got to continue that because, like, if he gets hurt, your season was over. Like, this is it. Like, you need to use him as much as you can as a running threat. That is going to be one of his biggest weapons in this game. And New England linebackers aren't exceptionally athletic enough. They're not those edge guys for New England aren't exceptionally athletic that they can play both, the handoff and the quarterback on that traditional option. So I do expect that to be a huge part of their game plan and need to work effectively if they have a chance.
Does Tennessee have an issue now, though? Because we talked about all this man coverage that New England's going to face, but New England plays more man coverage than anybody else. Does Tennessee have the guys? I know they have Hall of Famer Corey Davis out there, but do they have the guys to beat New England's man coverage?
Do we have an update, Corey Davis, how many he needs to break?
It doesn't count anymore because it's in the playoffs. He's not getting credit for these.
Wait, do I have my own? Where's my tally? Where's my Corey Davis tally here?
Well, we could definitely fit it on a Post-it note if that helps.
Whoa, wait till next year when he has 120 catches next year. They need to throw a few more screens his way. Really kind of
a lot more screens,
rack
apparently.
up the receptions. But look, Tennessee hasn't had a great receiving core this year. We've talked a lot about how Mariota is graded better than his stats have showed, and that's been part supporting cast, part just interception luck. They've got some work to do in their pass game as well.
Now, I could see it being a low-ish scoring game as well. I could see this one sort of slugging out in the teens for a while.
That's where the weather is, by the way, right about the teens, maybe low 20s. So it's a colder game, which does affect the pass game.
But when you just go through matchup by matchup in this game, it's like there's really not much to suggest Titans really have. Like it just
now look, the Titans got beaten by the 49ers and the Cardinals. The Patriots going to beat them, and it's going to be, it's not going to be close.
Well, we seem like we're talking ourselves in the other way. We're just trying to give examples of what would happen for Tennessee. A lot of things would have to go right here.
Yes. Exactly. That's what we're basically saying. So all said and done, Pats all around, I assume, in terms of pick.
I don't know. Brady, Belichick, and Kraft all hate each other. This could be the end of the dynasty. But
Belichick going to sabotage his team in the playoffs intentionally.
Yeah.
So
he'll get Malarkey fired so he can go to Tennessee. That's where he really wants to go.
Who wouldn't?
No, I already started the rumor
Nashville's
that
a great town.
Belichick's going to replace John Gruden Monday Night Football. Loves talking about football, Belichick.
Yeah. That would actually be electric.
Wouldn't it be great if he each week was, you didn't know which Brady you were going to get, the guy that will talk endlessly about interesting stuff and you get great content out of him, or that just monosyllabic Belichick one Monday Night Football where he's just answering, yep.
Next question.
No. Bad.
I would turn on my TV at that. I do not listen to announcers ever. I would turn it on.
But I think that would be like the Tony Romo thing, where it would be amazing the first week, and then after that, it would get pretty old pretty quickly.
Could be.
So you never know what you're going to get.
All right, on to the Sunday matchups. First up, the Jaguars traveling to the Steelers. Steelers a 7-point favorite in this one, even though last time these two teams matched up, Jaguars blew the doors off the Steelers. Do you see a chance of that happening again in this one, Steve?
Blowing the doors off, no. I think the Jags have a chance to win, but if you go back and watch that game, Ben Roethlisberger had 5 interceptions.
Yes, he did.
One of them was tipped at the line of scrimmage. 2 pick sixes that were a little unlucky, but the Jags defense earned it. I mean, they were fantastic in that game, but they also had the 90-yard touchdown run from Fournette that we've talked about already. It was like if you drew up the perfect Jaguars game, which is defense dominates, Bortles throws the ball 5 times, they run the ball at 3 yards a pop and then break one big one. I mean, that is perfect Jacksonville football, and I don't see them being able to duplicate it again against the Steelers.
That's exactly what it is. If Blake Bortles plays the same as he did in that last game, they will not win. Blake Bortles had a passer rating of 12.5 from a clean pocket the last time these two teams played.
He only threw the ball 14 times. I mean, that was the classic, like, here we are going to never let you do anything, just keep handing it off.
And still threw an interception.
He did.
So like you say, they needed 5 interceptions. They needed a busted run fit to get Fournette free. They needed everything else to go right for that to happen. There's no way that happens 2 times in a row. Bortles, unless he plays significantly better, unless we see the Blake Bortles that we saw for most of December, I don't see any way the Jags win unless their defense just does something spectacular and forces enough turnovers to make it happen.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing going into this one that makes me dislike the Jaguars' chances is sort of what we talked about in the first podcast of the week, which was the way the Jaguars' running game has been trending of late, which is not well at all. If they were running like they were early in the season, if they were getting that sort of production out of the running back position, out of their offensive line, I could talk myself into maybe taking them in this one. But the fact is, over the last 3 games against 3 not exceptional run defenses, they just have not produced. I don't see it happening again in this one. Steelers have enough up front with that 3-headed monster of Cam Haywood, Stephon Tuitt, and Javon Hargrave to stop that running game. And then the other side of the ball, like I said, I don't see Roethlisberger making that many mistakes. Antonio Brown's going to be back in this one, going to be healthy, supposedly. I just don't think that he'll throw the game away. And if he's not throwing the game away, I trust him to put up a little more points than what Blake Bortles will.
That was Roethlisberger's worst game of the season. It was his last bad game of the season. He began this year in a bit of a funk, but since basically that game, he has been on a tear and been maybe as good as any quarterback in the NFL. I don't see any way you're going to get a terrible game out of Roethlisberger again. And Jimmy Garoppolo was able to carve up this Jaguars defense. I don't think it's quite as spectacular as it has been at times this season. And there's more than enough weaponry in that Pittsburgh team to do some damage against it.
There were also times in that game it almost seemed like Roethlisberger made a throw that he just always makes and was like, oh, wow, Jalen Ramsey just broke on it for an interception. There was a post route. Jalen's done this a few times this year where he's just kind of playing trail on a post. It's not a terrible throw, but Ramsey's athleticism and break on the ball is so good, he turns it into an interception opportunity. There was a couple plays like that where Roethlisberger just, I don't know if he was surprised by just how athletic some of the Jags secondary was, but I don't think they're going to catch him off guard maybe as much as they did back in week 5.
That was also, maybe I'm retiring Ben Roethlisberger. Maybe
it's too much.
I don't
maybe
know what's
I'm
going
done.
on. I'm only 35, but this seems like the end of the road. And that talk has been just non-existent over the past handful of weeks. He's, like Sam mentioned, been one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL over the second half of the season. So, yeah, I mean, he could revert back to that form, but I trust him at least to be a little productive offensively. And I think that's all they'll need.
First matchup, Jags blitzed only twice in the entire game on 55 dropbacks. It was pure four-man rush. When they pressured Roethlisberger, 3 out of those 5 interceptions, 8.3 passer rating. So the Jags would need one of those types of superhuman efforts from their front four, and this is a pretty good Steelers offensive line as well, so that's a good
I was going to
battle.
say, the sort of underrated thing in this one is that they don't really need to lean on Roethlisberger and have him drop back 55 times in this one. The run game has been going the opposite direction of sort of the Jaguars' run game of late, and I mentioned it before, the Jaguars' defensive line in run defense just not been disciplined all season long. They are very, very susceptible to getting out of the gaps to try to make plays. And that's the Cardinal sin against Le'Veon Bell.
Yeah.
He makes you pay for that more than any other running back in the NFL. If he sees that, I expect him, if I were to predict anyone to have a big game in this one, it would be Le'Veon Bell.
Yeah, you've been calling that for a while. The whole Jags front seven and inconsistency, and it could be a Le'Veon Bell game. But if Roethlisberger plays a solid game, I think Pittsburgh's going to be okay. It should be fun though. Jags defense, man, they are just. We're talking ourselves into Pittsburgh's going to have their way, but I don't care about the Garoppolo game. That was one game. Big picture, Jags defense has been awesome this year. Mm-hmm. So they're legit.
I called them last week. The best defense still left in the playoffs, but that's at their highest level. I think they have the highest peak. They also, like I said, mentioned, there's inconsistencies there that week in and week out can be exploited.
And we haven't really gotten into the whole Bortles thing. We said he threw the ball 14 times in this game. Last week, they literally did not let him throw the ball. I mean, to go to the AFC Championship, you probably have to complete a few.
Well, he also didn't feel like throwing the ball in the second half. He's just like, I'd like to scramble.
It was worse than that. He decided himself that it was a better idea not attempting to throw the ball.
It was windy.
They were like calling passes. He's like, "You sure?"
It was windy.
We'll turn it into a run real quick. Yeah. Although the thing is, we haven't really talked about Bortles because predicting what Bortles does week in and week out this year, it's throwing shit at a wall. You have no clue what's going to happen.
People were on us to write Blake Bortles has turned the corner stories for like 3 weeks running. And all the time I was saying, I am not touching that because it is going back at some point. There's no way of knowing that this is going to continue.
It's really amazing because at the end of the preseason when they were remember they were debating about Chad Henne? They gave Chad Henne a start at the end of the preseason. Yeah. That was this year, by the way, guys. Like they were debating between these two. I said it looked like Bortles had the yips when he was throwing the ball. Like he had, that's how bad his confidence looked. And then he had a decent year. And then last week was a little like the yips as well. It's been an amazing ride with Bortles this year.
Chad Henne, by the way, looks like somebody has taken Blake Bortles and shaved him all over. It's like the same head. Somebody's just removed all the hair from it. It's bizarre. The two of them were stood next to each other on the sideline this past week, and it was freaky.
So I'll have to get a little screenshot of that, Sam.
So basically, Bortles in like 4 years, the way he's been trending. But
hey, leave a balding man alone, Mike.
All right, I'm going Steelers though in this one. Although I think it might still be close. Steve,
I'm taking the Steelers as well. Yep.
Same.
Yeah, same.
All going Steelers. All right, last game of the weekend. New Orleans Saints traveling to the Minnesota Vikings. Vikings a 5-point favorite. My favorite matchup of the weekend. So much good stuff going on in this one. Sam, break it down.
Yeah, there's matchups all over this game that are really exciting to watch. There's everywhere you look, there's an interesting one-on-one matchup that could be fun. Alvin Kamara obviously has been the Saints' X-factor weapon all the way through the season, but we're going up against what I think is the best defense left in the playoffs, at least the most consistent or the one with the highest. If the Jags are the one with the highest ceiling, I think the Vikings probably have the highest floor of any defense. You know you're going to get good play out of them and across the board in every single game. They've got a guy like Harrison Smith that can go with Alvin Kamara wherever they line him up if they want to go that route. They've got run stuffers inside with guys like Linval Joseph that can bottle up the middle of that defense. I think that's a really interesting matchup. Marshawn Lattimore going up against Adam Thielen just off the line of scrimmage could be spectacular because I think Adam Thielen along with Doug Baldwin have the two best releases of any wide receivers off the line. And I think that's what they will do in terms of shadowing those two based on what they did before is Thielen and Lattimore and then Ken Crawley covering Diggs. Then it becomes interesting to see if the Vikings move Thielen into the slot to get him away from Lattimore's coverage and try and work him over the middle. I really love this matchup all across both sides.
You worry a little bit about, say, the middle. The Saints defense has been really good. Linebackers in coverage and what Minnesota can do, just short passing game over the middle. The Saints have shown holes over the last few weeks. busted coverages last week against Carolina. They gave a lot of touchdown opportunities to Cam. There were some drop passes that bailed them out. I've been touting the Saints defense all year. We've talked about how really good they've been, but they're not as locked down maybe as they looked weeks like 3 through 10 or 11, right? They looked like they were just this lockdown defense, and they've shown signs of weakness over these last few weeks.
The matchup I go back to in this one that made me weary of picking the Saints is basically the Saints linebackers, Craig Robertson, Manti Te'o. Those two guys in coverage against someone like Jerick McKinnon, against what the Vikings do with their running backs and out of the backfield, is just a little scary to me because they'll exploit that with wheel routes, all day long if they can. Those two linebackers just aren't. We saw it with the Christian McCaffrey play. They're just not good. It's not athletic enough to keep up with running backs out of the backfield.
There is something to scare you about both sides. So the Saints have to deal with the linebackers. The Vikings, that offensive line is starting to look very creaky, and they're going up against a very good defensive front. In particular, Cam Jordan obviously has been a force this year. That Vikings offensive line this year was never good. It just wasn't a problem like it was a year ago. But now they've had to go into the bench in a couple of spots, which means they're bringing back the guys that were a problem, which is inviting an issue to come. I've said for a while now that if this Vikings team collapses in the playoffs, it's going to be the offensive line that causes that, and I think that's still a concern.
We still got to go back to the quarterbacks, right? Drew Brees versus Case Keenum, as well as Case Keenum has played all season.
KQB pod guy.
Yeah. Well, this is going to be a factor, right? Drew Brees playing well. He was excellent last week. Versus Case Keenum every week. Are the wheels going to fall off? Are the wheels going to fall off? Sam's saying it's the offensive line that's going to maybe make the wheels fall off. This is one of those games I think does come down to the wire because the Saints are the underdog, but when it comes down to crunch time, and Drew Brees might have to make that big game-winning drive. I got faith in Drew Brees doing it. I don't know if I have faith in Case Keenum at this point.
I do agree that the Brees factor can't be overstated. He's still in a dome, so he still technically has that in his favor. I don't think the Vikings offensive line is going to be as big an issue as Sam makes it out to be, especially because they just have Cam Jordan. Like, they have some all right interior defensive linemen. Sheldon Rankins has been playing well, but there's no one across from Cam Jordan anymore after Alex Okafor got hurt. Like I mentioned last week, they had 45 pass rushers on edge guys not named Cam Jordan. They didn't get a single pressure. So it's going to be him causing the havoc. You can game plan around one guy. You can't game plan for multiple. And so I do think we'll see the Vikings have some sort of answer for Cam Jordan in this one.
And that I think is probably true. But while the Saints don't necessarily have anyone else that's going to take over a game, it's more a factor of how bad the guys are that the Minnesota's offensive line is going to be putting out there. So a guy like Sheldon Rankins has not been amazing, but suddenly looks like a superstar when you're trying to block him with Jeremiah Styles.
Yeah.
And I think they've got a couple of guys. David Onyemata is the same kind of deal. They've got a few people that could suddenly have monster games going up against the right opposition. I think that's the concern for that Vikings offensive line. It's not that they're going to be facing world beaters outside of Cam Jordan. It's that they're bad enough that it doesn't matter who they're facing. They're going to have issues.
One thing to watch, I think, when you look at the Saints and their passing game, and Michael Thomas is their clear number one, and difficult to cover no matter who is on him. Alvin Kamara, what he does out of the backfield, we saw last week the Ted Ginn factor, right? Just that if he can create that one big play. Now Minnesota plays a lot of cover 4. That's quarters. That's essentially you can scheme up one-on-ones against cover 4 is the basic gist of it. So there's going to be one or two plays where Ted Ginn is isolated on a cornerback running a deep post. If Brees and Ginn can connect on one of those, that could be one of the game changers in this game that I think is really, really tight. 5-point spread is a little surprising to me. I think it's a really tight game. I think the Saints are just really good overall, and they have that quarterback advantage. It might just come down to one of these big plays with Ginn against the Vikings corners running deep.
As I say, these two teams have played already. They played all the way back in week 1. The Vikings took that game.
That was when the Saints
that was also
was like
Saints D before
Sam Bradford as well.
And it was also with Sam Bradford. The Vikings ended up winning that one 29-19. They were at home again in this one, and they didn't have an answer for Cam Jordan in week 1. Cam Jordan had a sack, a hit, a hurry in that one. But like you said, there were a lot of coverage busts on the back end. Some of that, though, I'm not sure in retrospect that, yes, they looked terrible those first 2 weeks, but they played the Patriots and they played the Vikings. Some of that might have just been those are two of the better offenses in the NFL in terms of also what they scheme in the passing game. It might have been something that could rear its head again in this game, just because of the concepts that the Vikings do run.
It was a quirky couple weeks, too, because remember, they gave up a passer rating of like 140 total.
Yeah.
But it was also 158.3 when they pressured the quarterback, because Cam Jordan had a ton of pressure those first 2 weeks. But Sam Bradford was making great throws. Brady was making great throws. So it was a quirky first 2 weeks, but it looked like the old Saints from the last couple of years. It's like, how do these guys give up 40 points all the time and 500 yards?
Well, there's also kind of a couple of interesting things from that first game is that, one, the Vikings starters didn't have a great game on the offensive line, which doesn't bode particularly well for their backups prospects. Two, they had Dalvin Cook having a fantastic game right out of the gate. He's not there anymore. Now, they've done pretty well.
I don't think that's going to happen.
No, I don't think it's going to happen. You're right. It's going to be very, very surprising if Dalvin Cook is out there and has 127 yards again. But they've done a pretty good job patching it up with Jarrett McKinnon and Latavius Murray, but neither of those guys, I think, is going to have that kind of impact against the Saints D. So, a couple of the ways that the Vikings, or a couple of the interesting aspects of that first game could be factors this time as well.
A lot of stuff to watch. When you put it all together, though, Steve,
I got a little nugget
add it
from the QB annual.
Ooh,
nice.
Red zone. I love this little red zone section in the book.
That was mine. I wrote those.
Not so much the writing. I don't care about the writing.
Writing's
It's
terrible.
It's good writing. You had some well-written stuff, Mike, I have to say. Sam, you did okay as well. But it has the targets for each quarterback's top targets on third down and red zone and all that stuff. Top target in the red zone for the Saints, Alvin Kamara. Out of the backfield, so he had 15 targets. 14 of them were caught. So 14 for 15, Breeze thrown to Kamara. 1 drop. That was the only incompletion, and 4 touchdowns. So that's, screen game, split them out wide, creativity in the red zone, and the fact that he's been targeted more than a Michael Thomas or more than a Brandon Coleman, who's about 6'6". I just think that's just an interesting little ploy by the Saints and their creativity.
And that Week 1 game was pre-Alvin Kamara really breakout, before they really started to find out how to use him the best way possible. So he'll probably make an impact in this one. Like I said, add it all up. Where are you going, Sam? Who takes it when it's all said and done?
This is tough. This, I think, is the closest game of the weekend. It's very tricky to pick. I'm going to lean with the Vikings purely based on being at home. I think it's a toss-up otherwise.
I'm going with the Saints. I think it's going to be PFF's top 4 graded quarterbacks in the Final 4. Brady, Roethlisberger, Ryan, and Breeze. It's a quarterback-driven league. I think that's where we land.
Now we see where Steve's picks have been driving us.
Yeah, all quarterbacks. But I think it is a fantastic matchup, especially Saints offense against this great Minnesota defense. It's going to be fun to watch.
I'm leaning Vikings. I know, Steve, you sort of cringed when I said it was a 5-point line, but the Vikings this season covered more than any other team in the NFL. They're 11-4-1 against the line.
Ooh.
I think they win at home. That defense has enough to slow down Breeze enough, and I just don't trust the Saints D. They've burned me too many times to buy back into them. So that's how we're picking it. Hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode. We'll be back Monday recapping all of this weekend's action. Have a good one.